The Grand Conclave Station hung in space like a massive jewel, orbiting the neutron star Kex 479. Its halls had witnessed 1,000 years of galactic politics, treaties and decisions that shaped entire civilizations. Today, those halls buzzed with unusual tension. The emergency session had been called with rare urgency, and representatives from 47 species gathered in the central chamber. Ambassador Jakara of the Vreen Dominion stood at the speaking platform, her 4 eyes scanning the assembled delegates. Her scaled skin rippled with the blue patterns that indicated serious concern among her people. She activated the holographic display, and images of Earth floated above the council floor. "Honored members," Jakara began, her translator converting her clicking speech into the common tongue. "We face a situation that requires immediate action. A new species has achieved faster-than-light travel. They call themselves humans." Murmurs rippled through the chamber. New species were always a concern, but rarely did they warrant an emergency session. Jakara continued, her presentation methodical and damning. "Our intelligence teams have spent 3 cycles observing this species from a distance. What we discovered is deeply troubling." She gestured, and the display changed to show human cities, armies, and warships. These creatures are primitive in every meaningful way. They use kinetic weapons, throwing metal at each other with chemical explosives. Their biology is fragile. A simple toxin that any child of our species could survive would kill them in minutes. They live barely 100 of their years, which gives them no wisdom or patience. A delegate from the Crystalline Shard Collective chimed in, its voice like wind through crystal caves. "Fragile primitives are not typically a concern." "Why the emergency session?" Jakara's patterns shifted to red, the color of warning. "Because they are also dangerously unstable. Our psychologists have studied their broadcasts and history. These humans have been at war with themselves for their entire existence. They have committed atrocities against their own kind that would make even the Krovar butcher clans hesitate. They are emotional, irrational, and violent." The chamber erupted in discussion. Some delegates argued for immediate quarantine of human space. Others suggested careful observation. A few, mainly from peaceful species, advocated for gentle contact and guidance. Military Coordinator Belthos of the Nexian hierarchy called for silence with a sonic pulse. The tall insectoid being approached the platform, his mandibles clicking with what his species considered amusement. "I have reviewed the tactical data. The human threat is minimal. They possess exactly 47 warships, none larger than a Nexian corvette. They have no energy shielding technology, no plasma weapons, no graviton manipulation. They are centuries behind our youngest council species." He displayed a human warship on the hologram, rotating it slowly. "Look at this design. Crude. Inefficient. They still use nuclear fusion reactors instead of zero-point energy. Their weapons are laughable. Magnetic acceleration systems that fire solid projectiles. Against our shields, these would be like throwing pebbles at a fortress." Warcast Commander Krethix of the Mandorian Empire rose from his seat, his massive frame towering over most other delegates. His species had served as the Council's military arm for 300 years, and his presence commanded respect born from fear. His deep, rumbling laugh echoed through the chamber. "This council wastes time on frightened speculation," Krethix said, his tusked face splitting into what might have been a smile. "I have crushed 17 species who thought themselves strong. These humans are nothing. They are children playing with toys, and now they have stumbled into a galaxy of adults." He walked to the center of the chamber, his heavy footfalls making the floor vibrate. "I propose we give them a simple choice. Surrender their autonomy, accept council governance and live as a protectorate, or refuse and be pacified. With my fleet, I could subjugate their entire civilization in less than a day." The debate raged for hours. Some species argued for mercy, suggesting that humanity could be guided toward civilization. Others, particularly those who had experienced the chaos of integrating primitive species before, advocated for strict control. The memory of the Keltharian incident 3 centuries ago still haunted many delegates. That species had been given freedom and had nearly sparked a galactic war through their reckless expansion. Finally, after much deliberation, the council voted. The decision was nearly unanimous. Humanity would be given 72 hours to accept council terms or face military action. The terms were harsh, but in the council's view necessary. Humans would dismantle their military, accept council governors on all major worlds, and submit to a 1,000-year period of supervised development. Krethix volunteered his fleet immediately, eager for what he considered an easy victory. My ships will arrive at their home system in 68 hours. I will give them the full 72 hours to consider, as the Council demands. But I predict their resistance will last no more than 6 hours, perhaps 8 if they are particularly stubborn or stupid. Other military coordinators agreed with his assessment. The human fleet was tiny, their weapons primitive, and their lack of experience in real warfare would be their downfall. The Council began to discuss post-conquest governance, already planning how to reshape human society. What none of them knew was that the human diplomatic vessel Endeavor had been present the entire time. Cloaked by technology the Council did not know humans possessed. Captain Elena Vasquez sat in her command chair, her face a mask of diplomatic composure, but her hands gripped the armrests until her knuckles turned white. "Captain," her communications officer whispered, "we have everything recorded. Every word, every tactical assessment, every insult." Vasquez nodded slowly, her dark eyes fixed on the main screen showing the Council chamber. She watched Krethix laugh, watched the delegates dismiss her species as primitive and weak, watched them vote to end human independence without even attempting real diplomacy. "Send it all back to Earth," she said quietly. "Encrypt it with the highest priority codes, and include my personal recommendation to Admiral Cothery." She paused, her jaw tightening. "Tell him that diplomacy has failed. Tell him to prepare for war." The message shot across space toward Earth at faster-than-light speed, carrying with it the Council's ultimatum and humanity's recorded response. The Council believed they had made a simple, rational decision to protect the galaxy from a dangerous primitive species. They had no idea they had just made the worst mistake in galactic history. In 72 hours, they would learn what humanity truly meant when they went to war. The emergency message reached Earth 16 hours after the Council's vote. It arrived at the Combined Fleet Command Center in Geneva, buried 300 meters beneath the Swiss Alps. Admiral James Cothery was in a strategy meeting when his aide interrupted, something that never happened unless the situation was critical. Cothery read Captain Vasquez's report in silence, his weathered face showing no emotion. Around him, the other Joint Chiefs waited. When he finished, he played the Council recording for them without comment. They watched the alien delegates debate humanity's fate like scientists discussing the removal of a disease. "They gave us 72 hours, General Park said finally, her voice tight with controlled anger. "The Mandorian fleet arrives in 68. They think we will surrender," Admiral Chen added, shaking his head. "Or that we will last 6 hours if we fight." Cothery stood and walked to the massive holographic display that showed the solar system. He studied it for a long moment, his mind already calculating angles, distances, and timing. When he spoke, his voice was calm, almost gentle. "They made several critical errors in their assessment," he said. "First, they observed our military and saw primitive weapons. They did not understand what those weapons truly are. Second, they studied our history and saw constant warfare. They thought this made us unstable. They did not realize it made us very, very good at fighting. And third, they assumed that because we only recently achieved faster-than-light travel, we spent that time in peaceful exploration." He turned to face his officers, and something cold flickered in his eyes. "We did not. We spent 200 years preparing for exactly this scenario. We knew the galaxy would not welcome us peacefully. We knew we would have to fight for our place among the stars. And we have been ready." The room fell silent. Everyone present had been part of the long preparation, but hearing it stated so plainly still sent chills down their spines. "Activate Operation Blackout," Cothery ordered. "All civilian and military communications go dark in 1 hour. Every ship, every station, every colony. If the aliens are watching, they see nothing but silence. Let them think we are paralyzed with fear." Orders flew across the solar system faster than light itself. On Mars, the Colonial Defense Force powered up weapon systems that had been hidden beneath the red soil for decades. On Luna, railgun platforms disguised as mining equipment rotated toward the outer system. In the asteroid belt, hundreds of autonomous defense drones activated and began moving into position. On Earth itself, the transformation was stunning. Every major city had hidden military installations beneath it, built during the century when humanity had unified under the threat of extinction from their own weapons. Now those weapons were aimed outward, at a threat from the stars instead of from across an ocean. Dr. Sarah Okonkwo worked in a bunker beneath Lagos, analyzing the alien transmissions with her team. She was a xenobiologist by training, but had spent the last 20 years studying potential alien threats. Now her theoretical work became brutally practical. The Mandorians rely heavily on energy shielding, she explained to the military commanders via encrypted link. Their shield technology is impressive, designed to deflect or absorb plasma weapons and lasers. But their specifications show a critical weakness. They never developed protection against kinetic weapons because every advanced species uses energy weapons. They will have some kinetic resistance, but nothing designed for high-velocity impacts. Our railguns? A commander asked. We'll go through their shields like they are not there, Dr. Okonkwo confirmed. They accelerate tungsten projectiles to 0.3% of light speed. At that velocity, the kinetic energy is devastating. The Mandorians have never faced anything like it because they think kinetic weapons are primitive. Across human space, pilots climbed into their fighters and said goodbye to their families. Lieutenant Marcus Chen held his 5-year-old daughter Lily close, memorizing the feel of her small arms around his neck. You promised to take me to see Saturn's rings, Lily said, her voice muffled against his shoulder. I will, Marcus promised. But first, Daddy has to make sure the bad aliens do not hurt anyone. Can you be brave for me? She nodded and Marcus handed her to his wife Jennifer. Their eyes met and no words were needed. Jennifer knew the statistics. Fighter pilots had the lowest survival rate in fleet combat. But she also knew that if people like Marcus did not fight, Lily would grow up as a slave to an alien empire. In orbit around Jupiter, the carrier Yorktown prepared its fighter wing. In the asteroid belt, the stealth destroyers checked their torpedo loads. Around Saturn, the defense platforms armed their railguns, and near Neptune, the mines waited in the cold darkness, silent and patient. The aliens thought they saw all of humanity's military power. They counted 47 warships and dismissed them as insignificant. What they did not see were the 300 ships that had been built in the asteroid belt shipyards, far from observing eyes. They did not see the 1,000 autonomous defense platforms scattered throughout the system. They did not see the network of weapons that turned the entire solar system into a fortress. More importantly, they did not understand human psychology. Every species the Council had encountered followed similar patterns. They had warrior castes and civilian populations. They had rules for warfare and codes of honor. They surrendered when defeat seemed certain. Humans had none of these limitations. Every human was a potential soldier. They had trained their entire population in basic combat from childhood, a legacy of the Unification Wars. They had no honor codes in warfare because honor did not keep you alive. And they never ever surrendered when their survival was at stake. Admiral Cothry addressed humanity from the command center, his message broadcast to every screen on Earth, Mars, Luna, and the colonies. Billions of humans stopped what they were doing and listened. 68 hours from now, an alien fleet will arrive at our home with the intention of conquering us. They believe we are primitive. They believe we are weak. They believe we will surrender or be destroyed within hours. He paused and a thin smile crossed his face. They are about to learn why apex predators do not back down. The broadcast ended and humanity went to work. There was no panic, no chaos. Every person knew their role. The factories that had built starships now built ammunition. The medical centers prepared for casualties. The children were moved to deep shelters, protected by meters of rock and steel. And in the cold vacuum between worlds, the human fleet waited. They maintained communication silence, their ships drifting on ballistic trajectories that made them invisible to long-range sensors. They watched the countdown tick toward zero. The Mandorians expected to find a panicked, divided species begging for mercy. Instead, they would find something the galaxy had not seen in 1,000 years. They would find a species that had evolved to hunt, refined warfare to an art form over 10,000 years of constant conflict, and had spent 2 centuries preparing for this exact moment. They would find humanity at war, and that would make all the difference. The Mandorian war fleet emerged from faster-than-light travel at the edge of the solar system, near the orbit of Neptune. 300 warships materialized in perfect formation, their hulls gleaming in the distant light of the sun. It was an overwhelming display of force, designed to make any enemy surrender at the sight of it. Warcast Commander Krethix stood on the bridge of his flagship, the inevitable conquest, and felt satisfaction deep in his bones. This would be an easy victory, a simple demonstration of Mandorian power. After this, perhaps the Council would grant his people control over this sector of space. The humans would learn their place, and the galaxy would see once again why the Mandorian Empire was feared. Begin full sensor sweep, Krethix ordered. Locate their pathetic fleet so we may begin negotiations. The sensor officer worked his controls, then hesitated. Commander, I am detecting very little activity in the inner system. No communications traffic, no ship movements, nothing, Krethix frowned. He had expected to find the humans scrambling to mount a defense or perhaps broadcasting desperate pleas for mercy. This silence was unexpected. Perhaps they have already accepted their fate, his second-in-command suggested. Some species recognize when resistance is futile. Broadcast our ultimatum, Krethix ordered. Let them know that mercy is still available if they surrender immediately. The message went out on all frequencies, translated into the primitive human languages. Krethix waited for a response, counting the seconds. Surely the humans would reply, would beg, would offer something in exchange for their survival. Nothing. Only silence answered him. They mock us with silence, Krethix growled. Very well. We advance. All ships move toward the fourth planet, their homeworld. We will drag them to the negotiating platform if we must. The fleet began moving inward, maintaining their proud formation. It was a standard Council military approach, designed to demonstrate overwhelming force while offering the enemy time to reconsider. In 300 years of Mandorian military service, this tactic had never failed. They passed the orbit of Uranus, their sensors sweeping ahead for any sign of resistance. The ships maintained perfect spacing, their shields glowing with power, their weapons charged and ready. Behind them, Neptune grew smaller, and ahead, the inner system waited. That was when the first mine detonated. The explosion tore through the rear guard of the Mandorian formation, catching 3 destroyers completely by surprise. The mines had been floating dormant in the freezing darkness, invisible to sensors because they were not powered up until the exact moment of detonation. They were simple devices, really, just nuclear warheads with basic proximity sensors. Primitive by galactic standards. But primitive did not mean ineffective. 23 ships disappeared in the nuclear fire before the Mandorian fleet could react. Shields that were designed to handle energy weapons struggled against the raw kinetic force and radiation of the blasts. Ships tumbled out of formation, their systems overloaded. Krethix roared in fury and surprise. Return fire! Find the weapons platforms! But there were no platforms. The mines had been scattered across millions of kilometers of space. Impossible to detect until they activated. The Mandorians tightened their formation and increased shield power, but the damage was done. Their perfect formation was broken, and more importantly, their confidence was shaken. Continue advance, Krethix ordered. These tricks will not save them. Forward! The fleet pushed deeper into the solar system, but now every sensor operator watched their screens with nervous intensity. They approached Saturn's orbit, and this time they were ready for an ambush. Their shields were at maximum power, their weapons tracking anything that moved. They were ready for mines. They were ready for missiles. They were not ready for what humanity had hidden in Saturn's rings. The rings were composed of billions of chunks of ice and rock, ranging in size from dust particles to massive boulders. Scattered among those natural objects were human railgun platforms, built to look exactly like the surrounding debris. They had been there for 30 years, waiting with the patience of machines. When the Mandorian fleet came into range, they activated all at once. Tungsten rods, each one weighing 50 kilograms, were accelerated to a significant fraction of light speed by powerful magnetic coils. At that velocity, they did not need explosive warheads. The kinetic energy alone was devastating, and because they were solid projectiles rather than energy weapons, the Mandorian shields might as well have been tissue paper. 70 ships died in the first 30 seconds. The tungsten rods punched through shields, through armor, and through the ships themselves. Some projectiles went completely through one ship and continued into another behind it. The Mandorians tried to return fire, but their plasma weapons were too slow. By the time they could aim at a platform's location, it had already fired and shut down again, becoming just another piece of debris in the rings. Krethix watched his fleet die and felt something he had not experienced in decades. Fear. These were not primitive weapons. These were weapons designed by a species that understood warfare at a fundamental level. Every assumption he had made was wrong. Emergency evasive action, he shouted. Break formation and advance at maximum speed. The remaining ships scattered, abandoning their orderly formation for chaotic individual movement. It saved some of them. The railgun platforms had limited ammunition, and the random movement made targeting difficult. But it also meant the Mandorian fleet was now disorganized and panicked, racing toward Jupiter without any tactical coordination. That was when the human fleet revealed itself. They had been hiding in Jupiter's magnetosphere, using the massive planet's powerful magnetic field to mask their energy signatures. Now they emerged, and the Mandorians finally got a good look at their enemy. The human ships were smaller than Mandorian vessels, sleeker and faster. They did not move in formation but in what seemed like random patterns, making them impossible to predict. And they were fast, so incredibly fast. The human pilots pulled maneuvers that should have killed them, turns at accelerations that would turn most species into paste. The Mandorians did not know about inertial dampening fields that protected the human crews. They did not know about neural interface systems that let pilots react at computer speeds. They did not know that humanity had spent a century and a half developing combat drugs that increased reaction time and pain tolerance. They just saw ships that moved like living things, that fought with a fury and creativity they had never encountered. Lieutenant Marcus Chen flew his fighter through the chaos, his neural link feeding him information faster than conscious thought. Enemy ship ahead, weapons charging. Dodge left, roll fire missiles. Enemy destroyed. Next target. His wingman called targets. The fighter AI managed power systems. Marcus just flew, letting instinct and training guide him. Around him, the battle raged. Human frigates fired railguns and missiles in patterns that seemed random, but were actually precisely calculated chaos. Mandorian ships tried to respond with their plasma weapons, but plasma moved too slowly. By the time the energy reached its target, the human ship was somewhere else entirely. The carrier Yorktown launched wave after wave of fighters, each one piloted by a human who had trained for this moment their entire life. The Mandorians had better technology in many ways, but they had never needed to become experts at warfare. They had been the strongest for so long that they had forgotten what a real fight looked like. Humans had never forgotten. Humans had never stopped fighting, never stopped learning, never stopped improving their ability to kill efficiently. Krethix's flagship shuddered under multiple railgun impacts. His shields were failing, his armor was breached in 3 places, and half his weapons were offline. Around him, his fleet was being torn apart by an enemy they had dismissed as primitive. "Fall back," he ordered, his pride shattered. "All ships retreat to Mars orbit." "We regroup there." The surviving Mandorian ships turned and fled, accelerating desperately toward the inner system. Behind them, the human fleet pursued, not giving them a moment to rest or reorganize. What remained of the Mandorian war fleet, once 300 ships strong, now numbered less than 100. The Mandorian fleet limped toward Mars, leaving behind them a trail of debris and frozen bodies. Krethix sat in his command chair. His proud bearing crumbled into exhausted shock. His fleet, the pride of the Mandorian Empire, had been reduced to 91 functional ships. Many of those were damaged, running on backup systems and hope. "Get me a communication line to the Council," Krethix ordered, his voice hoarse. "I need reinforcements." "I need, Commander," his communications officer interrupted, which would normally result in severe punishment. "The humans are jamming all faster-than-light communications. We cannot reach the Council." Of course they were. These humans thought of everything. They had planned this battle down to the smallest detail, while Krethix had walked into their system assuming victory was guaranteed. The shame was almost worse than the fear. "Status of the fleet?" he asked. His tactical officer brought up what remained. 91 ships, but only 63 were at full combat capability. The rest were damaged and struggling. They had lost 2/3 of their force, and they had not even seen the human homeworld yet. "The human fleet is maintaining pursuit but not closing," the sensor officer reported. "They are staying just at the edge of our weapons range." Krethix understood. The humans were hurting them, pushing them toward something. Another trap, certainly. But what choice did he have? Turn and fight? His fleet would be destroyed. Try to retreat out of the system? The humans were faster and would cut them apart during the withdrawal. The only option was forward, toward Mars. They reached Mars orbit 71 hours and 43 minutes after the original ultimatum. The red planet hung in space before them, and Krethix felt a moment of hope. Perhaps they could use the planet as cover, regroup, and plan a more careful attack. That hope died when the sensors registered what was waiting for them. Ships. Dozens of human ships, maybe 100 or more, all in perfect formation around Mars. These were not the fast attack vessels that had harassed them from Jupiter. These were capital ships, heavy cruisers and battleships, their weapons already locked onto the approaching Mandorian fleet. How? Krethix whispered. Our intelligence said they only had 47 ships. His intelligence officer, still alive through a combination of luck and skill, checked his data again. Commander, those 47 ships were what we observed. These others must have been built in secret or hidden from our sensors. Humanity had lied, not just by omission but deliberately. They had shown the galaxy a weak military while building their true strength in places no one was watching. It was brilliant and terrifying. A communication came through on all frequencies, audio and video. The human who appeared on screen was older than the others Krethix had seen, with gray hair and a face that had seen many battles. The text identified him as Admiral James Cothery, Commander of United Earth Forces. Warcast Commander Krethix, the Admiral said, his voice calm and controlled. You were given 72 hours to reconsider your attack. You now have 17 minutes remaining. I suggest you use them wisely. Krethix felt his last reserves of courage crumbling. He was a warrior of the Mandorian Empire, a conqueror of worlds feared across the galaxy. But looking at this human admiral, seeing the cold calculation in his eyes, Krethix realized he was facing something worse than a powerful enemy. He was facing someone who had spent their entire life learning how to kill efficiently. We were told you were primitive, Krethix said, unable to keep the bitterness from his voice. We were told your weapons were crude and your tactics unsophisticated. Another human appeared on the communication line. The text identified her as Captain Elena Vasquez of the diplomatic vessel Endeavor. She smiled, but it was not a friendly expression. You were told correctly, she said. Our weapons are crude. We use kinetic projectiles and nuclear explosives because they work. Our tactics are unsophisticated because we don't waste time with honor codes and formation flying. We have been fighting each other for 10,000 years, Commander. You were never fighting primitives. You were fighting the most experienced warriors in the galaxy, and you just did not know it. The words hit Krethix like physical blows. Everything the Council had said, everything they had believed about humanity was true. But they had interpreted it backwards. Humanity's violence, their primitive weapons, their lack of sophisticated culture, these were not weaknesses. They were the traits of a species that had evolved to survive through constant warfare. Surrender, Admiral Cothery said, and it was not a request. Power down your weapons, drop your shields, and prepare to be boarded. You have attacked our home without provocation. You have killed our people, but we are not like you. We do not destroy defeated enemies. We accept surrender. Krethix looked at his tactical display. He still had 91 ships. The humans had perhaps 150 in total, counting the ones behind him and the ones ahead. In a straight fight, the odds were not impossible. Mandorian ships were larger and more powerful individually, but he knew what would happen if he gave the order to attack. His fleet would die, and it would die fast. The humans had already proven they could destroy his forces with minimal losses. This fleet waiting at Mars was fresh and undamaged. His was battered and demoralized. More than that, he thought about what would happen if he died here. The Council would send more ships, and eventually they might defeat humanity. But at what cost? How many fleets would they have to send? And what would humanity do with the time bought by each battle? They would build more ships, develop more weapons, become even more dangerous. Krethix made his decision. It was the hardest decision of his life, but it was the only logical one. All ships, he said quietly. Power down weapons. Drop shields. We surrender. Some of his officers protested. Some called him a coward. He silenced them with a look. They have beaten us, he said simply. We came here expecting to crush primitives. Instead, we found warriors who have been preparing for this fight since before our empire existed. There is no shame in losing to a superior enemy. The Mandorian fleet complied. One by one, the ships powered down their weapons and dropped their defensive shields. The human fleet approached carefully, not trusting but willing to accept the surrender. Admiral Cothery appeared on screen again. Commander Krethix, your flagship will be boarded. You and your senior staff will be taken into custody. Your crews will be treated well according to our laws of war. Any ship that attempts to restart weapons or flee will be destroyed immediately. Understood, Krethix said. The boarding happened quickly. Human Marines in powered armor entered through docking ports, moving with military precision. Krethix watched them and understood why his crew had lost so badly when the few boarding actions had occurred. These humans were not just soldiers. They were predators in armor, trained and equipped to kill in close quarters. Lieutenant Marcus Chen managed to land his damaged fighter on Mars, his fighter held together mostly by emergency patches and hope. He climbed out exhausted and found Jennifer and Lily waiting for him at the landing pad. He held them both and cried, letting out the terror and stress of the battle. Dr. Sarah Okonkwo watched the surrender from the command bunker in Lagos, tears streaming down her face. Her predictions had been accurate, but she took no joy in being right. She had just helped humanity kill thousands of aliens. It was necessary, she knew, but it still hurt. Admiral Kothari stood on the bridge of his flagship and checked the chronometer. 73 hours and 11 minutes since the ultimatum had been delivered. The Mandorians had predicted the battle would last 6 to 8 hours. Instead, from the first mine detonating to the final surrender, only 11 minutes of actual combat had been needed. The galaxy had given humanity a deadline. Humanity had met it and added 11 minutes for good measure. The Grand Conclave station was in chaos. The emergency session had been called again, but this time there was no orderly debate. Representatives shouted at each other across the chamber floor while Ambassador Jakara tried desperately to maintain order. Silence, she finally roared, her translator amplifying her voice until it echoed through the massive hall. We will have order or I will clear this chamber. The delegates reluctantly quieted, but the tension remained thick enough to cut. On the central holographic display, the sensor data played again. The data had been collected by automated monitoring stations scattered throughout the galaxy, and it told a story that none of them wanted to believe. The Mandorian war fleet, 300 ships strong, had entered human space 73 hours after the ultimatum was delivered. 11 minutes later, the fleet had surrendered. The humans had destroyed 2/3 of the Mandorian forces with minimal losses. The greatest military power in the galaxy had been crushed by a species they had called primitive, just 3 days before. Military Coordinator Belthos of the Nexian hierarchy stood frozen, his mandibles slack with shock. His entire tactical assessment had been wrong. Catastrophically wrong. The humans did not fight like any species the galaxy had encountered before. They fought to win at any cost, using tactics that seemed random but were actually carefully calculated chaos. How did our intelligence fail so completely? Demanded a delegate from the Krovar clans. We observed them for months. We counted their ships. We assessed their technology. They lied, Shakara said simply. They showed us what they wanted us to see. They hid their true strength and let us underestimate them. It was a trap and we walked into it willingly. A week had passed since the battle. During that time, the Council had tried and failed to contact the Mandorian fleet. Now they knew why. The humans had jammed all communications, taken the survivors prisoner and effectively cut off all contact with the fleet. It was a level of tactical sophistication that suggested humanity had been planning for galactic warfare long before they achieved faster-than-light travel. The chamber doors opened, and a group of humans entered. Captain Elena Vasquez led them, but she was not alone. Admiral James Kothari walked beside her, and behind them came a full honor guard of human Marines in dress uniform. The Marines carried no visible weapons, but their presence was intimidating nonetheless. Each one stood 2 meters tall in their armor, and they moved with perfect synchronization. The council chamber fell silent. This was not the delegation of desperate primitives they had expected. This was a military force that had just won a decisive victory, and they carried themselves accordingly. Jakara recovered first. Captain Vasquez, Admiral Kothari, the council acknowledges your presence. We have reviewed the events of the past week and the council ordered an unprovoked attack on our homeworld. Admiral Kothari interrupted, his voice cutting through the chamber like a blade. You did not attempt diplomacy. You did not seek peaceful contact. You observed us for months, decided we were inferior, and voted to conquer us. These are acts of war. Several delegates started to protest, but Kothari raised a hand for silence. Amazingly, they complied. The Admiral's presence commanded respect in a way that went beyond rank or title. He was a warrior who had just won a victory, and everyone in the chamber knew it. You made several mistakes, Kothari continued. First, you assumed that primitive weapons meant primitive tactics. Our kinetic weapons are simple, yes, but they are effective. Second, you assumed that our constant warfare made us weak. It made us strong. We learned to fight better than any species in this galaxy, because we had to. Third, you assumed we would surrender when faced with superior numbers. He paused, letting the silence stretch. Humans do not surrender when our survival is at stake. We fight. We adapt, we win. You should have learned this before attacking us. Captain Vasquez stepped forward, carrying a datapad. The Council demanded we surrender our autonomy and accept your governance. Instead, we have demands of our own. The chamber erupted in protest. Shikara's patterns flashed angry red. You dare make demands of us? You are one species among thousands. You cannot dictate terms to the entire galactic community. We can, Admiral Cothery said simply, because we just proved we can defeat your military forces. Commander Krathix and his fleet are currently guests on Mars. Comfortable guests treated well according to our laws, but guests nonetheless. We could have destroyed them completely. We chose mercy. Do not make us reconsider that choice. The threat was clear and terrifying. If humanity could destroy the Mandorian fleet so easily, what would happen if they decided to attack Council space? The implications were staggering. What are your demands? Jakara asked quietly, her pattern shifting to the blue of submission. Captain Vasquez read from her datapad. First, humanity will be granted full Council membership with all rights and privileges. Second, all Council species will recognize human sovereignty over our current territory. Third, the Mandorian Empire will pay reparations for the attack on our space and the lives lost. Fourth, Warcast Commander Krathix will testify before this Council about what happened, so that all species understand the truth. And if we refuse? Asked a delegate from the Crystal Collective. Admiral Cothery smiled, but it was not a pleasant expression. Then we refuse to release Commander Krathix and his fleet. We close our borders to all Council species, and we begin expanding our territory into unclaimed space at a rate that will alarm you all. We did not seek conflict, but we will not be dictated to. We are done being treated as primitives. The Council debated for hours, but the conclusion was inevitable. Every demand was accepted. Humanity was too dangerous to antagonize further, and the Council needed to understand what they were dealing with. If humans could be allies instead of enemies, that was far preferable. Commander Krathix was brought before the Council via holographic link. The proud warrior who had left a week earlier was gone, replaced by someone who had seen the true nature of warfare. He testified honestly, describing the battle in detail. They do not fight like civilized species, Krathix said, his voice heavy with exhaustion. They do not follow codes of honor or give their enemies time to regroup. They fight to win, using every advantage they can create. Their weapons are simple but devastating. Their tactics are chaotic but precisely calculated. And most terrifying of all, they do not fear death. They accept it as a possible outcome and fight anyway. A delegate asked the question everyone wanted answered. Could the Council defeat humanity in an all-out war? Krathix was silent for a long moment. Perhaps, he said finally, if every Council species committed their full military strength, if we fought with total dedication, if we were willing to accept massive casualties, perhaps we could win. But it would cost millions of lives and decades of warfare. And even then, I am not certain, because while we were fighting them, humanity would be learning and adapting and building new weapons. They do not stop. They do not give up. They would make us pay for every star system, every planet, every victory. He looked directly at the Council members, meeting their eyes. I recommend peace. I recommend treating them as equals. Because the alternative is a war that will break this galaxy. The Council voted unanimously to accept all human demands. Humanity became the newest Council member, granted full rights and privileges. The Mandorian Empire agreed to reparations without protest. Warcast Commander Krathix was returned to his people, and his honest testimony about the battle earned him respect rather than shame. In the days following the agreement, something unexpected happened. 3 different species approached humanity with offers of military alliance. 2 others requested human military advisors to help modernize their defense forces. The species that had dismissed humanity as primitive now wanted them as allies, because everyone wanted humanity on their side rather than against them. Admiral Cothery stood in the observation deck of the diplomatic station above Earth, watching the construction of new ships in orbit. Captain Vasquez joined him, carrying 2 cups of coffee. 5 years ago, we achieved faster-than-light travel, she said quietly. 3 days ago, we were facing conquest. Now we are council members with a dozen alliance offers. It happened so fast. We were ready, Kathari replied. We spent 2 centuries preparing for hostile contact. When it came, we executed our plans perfectly. Now we show the galaxy that humanity can be a valuable ally. Do you think there will be more wars? Vasquez asked. Kathari sipped his coffee, thinking. Perhaps. The galaxy is a dangerous place, but now everyone knows what happens when you give humanity a deadline. They know we do not bluff, do not surrender, and do not lose easily. That knowledge will prevent many conflicts before they start. 5 years after the battle that became known as the 73-hour war, human military academies received students from 17 different species. The tactical doctrines that humanity had developed through millennia of warfare became studied across the galaxy. Human ships patrolled trade routes, protecting council commerce from pirates and raiders. 3 new species joined the council during those 5 years, each one sponsored by humanity. Earth became a center of diplomatic activity, and human culture spread throughout council space. The species that had nearly destroyed humanity now sought to learn from them. And in the deep black of space, human exploration vessels continued their original mission. They sought new worlds, made contact with isolated species, and expanded the boundaries of known space. They carried sensors and communication equipment, ready for peaceful contact. But they also carried railguns, missiles, and the knowledge of how to use them. Because humanity had learned the most important lesson of galactic politics. Peace was only possible when backed by the credible threat of war. They would always hope for diplomacy, but they would always be ready to fight. The galaxy had tested humanity and found them far stronger than expected. Now humanity would show the galaxy that they could be as good at peace as they were at war. The species that had survived 10,000 years of internal conflict would now work to ensure the galaxy remained stable and prosperous. But if anyone ever threatened Earth again, if anyone ever gave humanity another ultimatum, the response would be the same. Humanity would not surrender. Humanity would fight, and humanity would win.